The barbed wire snagged her skirt for the third time, and Theresa Brennan bit back a curse as she yanked the fabric free, hearing the telltale rip of cotton that meant another patch job by candlelight tonight. August 1884 had turned the New Mexico territory into a furnace, and sweat dripped down her spine as she struggled through the fence line that separated her father's failing ranch from the prosperous spread next door. She clutched the empty flour sack closer to her chest, praying the cowboy who owned these acres was far out on the range, because if he caught her stealing his apples again, there would be hell to pay. The tree stood 50 yards ahead, heavy with fruit that seemed to mock her family's struggles. Her father lay in bed with a fever that had lasted 3 weeks. Her mother tended him day and night, and her 2 younger brothers needed feeding. The drought had killed their crops, their few remaining cattle were too thin to sell, and pride only filled your belly until you got hungry enough to swallow it whole. Theresa had made it halfway to the tree when she heard the horse. She froze, her heart hammering against her ribs as hoofbeats approached from the east. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but running would only make her look more guilty, and besides, she was already caught in the open like a rabbit in a field. She straightened her spine and lifted her chin, preparing to face whatever came next with as much dignity as she could muster. The rider came around a small rise, and Theresa felt her stomach drop. She had seen Fletcher O'Brien from a distance before, at the general store in Cimarron or riding past on the road, but never this close. He sat tall in the saddle on a bay gelding, broad-shouldered and lean with dark hair that brushed his collar beneath a worn hat. Even from 30 feet away, she could see his eyes were a startling blue, and they were fixed directly on her. He brought his horse to a stop and sat there for a long moment, studying her. Theresa waited for the anger, the accusations, maybe even a threat to fetch the sheriff. Instead, Fletcher pushed his hat back slightly and spoke in a voice that was surprisingly gentle. "That fence can be tricky. Barbed wire does not care much about skirts." Heat flooded her cheeks, but not from the sun. "I was not trying to hide what I am doing. I need apples. My family needs food." "I can see that." He swung down from his saddle with easy grace and stood there, holding the reins. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, and younger than she had thought, probably not more than 25 or 26. "How long has it been since you have eaten properly?" The question caught her off guard. She had expected judgment, not concern. "That is none of your business." "Maybe not, but you are on my property, so that makes it somewhat my business." He tilted his head and something in his expression softened. "I am not angry. Just want to understand the situation." Theresa felt tears prick her eyes and hated herself for the weakness. She was 19 years old, not a child to cry over a little hardship. "My father is sick. Fever. We have had no rain, and what crops we had just dried up and blew away. We have been making do, but making do only lasts so long." Fletcher nodded slowly, then turned and walked toward the apple tree. For a confused moment, Theresa thought he was leaving her standing there, but then he reached up and began picking apples, filling his arms with the ripe fruit. He walked back and held them out to her. "Here, take these, and next time use the gate. I will leave it unlocked for you." She stared at him, unable to process what was happening. "What, the gate? About a quarter-mile south of here. I will leave it unlocked. You can come through any time you need something. There is no reason to tear up your clothes on that wire." He gestured to her skirt, where 3 new rips joined countless mended tears. "I do not understand. Why would you do that?" He met her eyes, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. Not pity exactly, but genuine kindness, the kind that seemed rare as rain these days. "Because everyone needs help sometimes. And because I remember what it was like to be hungry. Take the apples." I will bring some other things by your place tomorrow if that is all right. Some flour, maybe some salt pork. I cannot pay you. Did I ask you to? He smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger and somehow more open. Consider it being neighborly. That is still allowed, last I checked. Theresa took the apples with shaking hands, depositing them carefully in her flour sack. The Brennan place, 2 miles west on the main road. I know it. I will be by tomorrow morning. He swung back into his saddle, then paused. What is your name? Theresa Brennan, Fletcher O'Brien. Though I suppose you probably knew that already. He touched the brim of his hat. Take care getting home, Theresa Brennan, and remember the gate is open any time you need it. He rode off before she could respond, leaving her standing in the afternoon heat with a sack of apples and a head full of confusion. She had been prepared for anger, confrontation, maybe even the law. Instead, she had found unexpected kindness from a man who had every right to run her off his land. The walk home felt shorter than usual, though that might have been because her mind was so occupied with thoughts of blue eyes and a gentle voice. She scolded herself for being foolish. Fletcher O'Brien was just being decent, nothing more. He probably felt sorry for her, which should have stung her pride but somehow did not after seeing the genuine concern in his face. Her mother was in the kitchen when Theresa came through the door, thin and worn from weeks of worry. Martha Brennan looked up from the pot she was stirring, her eyes widening at the sight of the apples. Theresa, where did you get those? The O'Brien place. Theresa set the sack on the table. I went through the fence and he caught me, but he did not get angry. He just gave them to me and said to use the gate next time. Her mother sank into a chair, one hand pressed to her mouth. For a moment, Theresa thought she might cry. That family has always been good people. Fletcher's father helped us when we first came here before he passed. I should have thought to ask the son for help, but pride is a terrible thing sometimes. How is Papa? The same. The fever breaks for a little while, then comes back stronger. We need a doctor, but we have no money for one. Martha looked at her daughter with eyes that held too much sorrow. I have been praying for a miracle, and maybe God sent one in the form of a kind neighbor. Theresa helped her mother prepare the apples for a pie, a luxury they had not had in weeks. Her two brothers, Thomas and Timothy, 12 and 14 respectively, came in from trying to repair a section of fence that had fallen down, and their faces lit up at the smell of baking. That night, lying in her small bed under the eaves, Theresa found herself thinking about Fletcher O'Brien. She tried to picture his face, the way his eyes had been kind even when he had every right to be harsh. She thought about his offer to bring more supplies, about the gate left unlocked as a symbol of trust. It had been so long since anyone outside her family had shown her such consideration that she had almost forgotten what it felt like. She fell asleep, imagining those blue eyes, and woke to sunlight streaming through her window. Morning brought a flurry of activity. Theresa helped her mother change the sheets on her father's bed, spooned broth between his cracked lips, and swept the floors until they were as clean as she could make them. She told herself it was just normal housework, that it had nothing to do with the possibility of a visitor, but her mother gave her a knowing look that made her cheeks burn. Fletcher arrived mid-morning, driving a wagon loaded with supplies. He jumped down with that same easy grace she had noticed yesterday and touched his hat to both women. Mrs. Brennan, I am Fletcher O'Brien from next door. I heard your family was having some difficulties, and I wanted to help if I could. Martha looked at the wagon, at the sacks of flour and cornmeal, the salt pork and dried beans, and tears spilled down her cheeks. Mr. O'Brien, this is too much. We cannot accept such charity. It is not charity, madam. It is being neighborly. And if it makes you feel better, Maybe Theresa could come by my place a few times a week to help with some things. I have been managing alone since my housekeeper left last month, and the house is starting to show it." He glanced at Theresa. "If you are willing, of course, I would pay fair wages." Theresa understood what he was doing, giving them a way to accept the help without it feeling like a handout. She nodded quickly. "I can do that. I am a good cook and know how to clean." "Then it is settled." Fletcher began unloading the supplies, and Thomas and Timothy came running to help. He spoke easily with the boys, asking about the ranch and listening with genuine interest to their excited, overlapping answers. When everything was inside, Martha invited him to stay for coffee. They sat around the kitchen table, and Fletcher asked careful questions about William Brennan's condition. When Martha described the symptoms, Fletcher frowned. "That sounds serious. Has he seen a doctor?" "We cannot afford one," Martha admitted, her voice tight with shame. Fletcher was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "Dr. Harrison in Cimarron is a good man. I will ride into town and bring him back this afternoon. He can bill me for the visit. Mr. O'Brien, we cannot ask you to do that. You are not asking, I am offering." His voice was firm but kind. "No one should suffer for lack of a doctor when one is available. I will be back before supper with Dr. Harrison." He stood, thanked Martha for the coffee, and walked toward the door. Theresa followed him out to his wagon, wanting to say something but not sure what words could possibly be adequate. "You are doing too much," she said finally. "Why are you being so kind to us?" Fletcher gathered his reins and looked down at her. In the morning sun, his eyes were even bluer than she remembered. "I told you yesterday. Everyone needs help sometimes. My father taught me that a man's worth is not measured in his land or his cattle, but in how he treats people when they are down. I am just trying to live up to what he taught me." "Your father sounds like he was a good man." "He was. He died 2 years ago. Heart gave out while he was working cattle." Fletcher's expression grew distant. "I think about what he would do in most situations, helps me make decisions. I am sure he would be proud of you." Something flickered in Fletcher's eyes, something warm and grateful. "I hope so. I will be back later with the doctor. In the meantime, if you need anything, remember what I said about the gate." Theresa watched him drive away, one hand raised in farewell. Her heart was doing strange things in her chest, beating faster than normal, and she felt oddly light despite all the worry that had weighed her down for weeks. Her mother came out to stand beside her. "He is a good man, Theresa." "Yes, he is. And he looks at you in a way that suggests his kindness might not be entirely selfless." "Mama," Theresa felt her face flame, "he is just being neighborly, if you say so, dear." Martha smiled, the first real smile Theresa had seen on her face in weeks. "But I have eyes, and I know what I saw." Fletcher returned that afternoon with Dr. Harrison, a white-haired man with gentle hands and a no-nonsense manner. He examined William Brennan thoroughly, asking questions and making thoughtful noises. Finally, he straightened and addressed Martha. "It is a persistent fever, likely from an infection. I will leave some medicine that should help bring it down. He needs rest, plenty of fluids, and good food to build his strength back up. With proper care, I believe he will recover fully, though it may take a few weeks." The relief in the house was palpable. Dr. Harrison left detailed instructions and 3 bottles of medicine, refusing payment when Martha tried to offer what little money they had hidden away. "Mr. O'Brien has already taken care of it. Just focus on getting your husband well." After the doctor left, Fletcher lingered for a few moments. "I will come by tomorrow to see how he is doing. And Theresa, if you are still willing to help at my place, you can start any time that works for you." "I can come the day after tomorrow if that suits you," Theresa offered. "Once Papa is past the worst of this." That would be fine. Come by in the morning and I will show you what needs doing. He left with another tip of his hat, and Theresa found herself counting the hours until she would see him again. Her father's fever broke that night, the medicine working faster than any of them had dared hope. By morning, William Brennan was sitting up in bed, demanding real food and complaining about being kept inside. It was the most beautiful sound Theresa had ever heard. The next day, she borrowed her mother's best dress, which was not saying much, but at least it was clean and had fewer patches than her work clothes. She braided her dark hair carefully and pinched her cheeks for color, feeling foolish the whole time but unable to stop herself. The ride to the O'Brien ranch took 20 minutes on their old mare. Theresa followed the main road, then turned onto the lane that led to the house. It was a substantial place, built of wood and stone, with a wide porch and neat outbuildings. Everything spoke of prosperity and good management, a stark contrast to her family's struggling spread. Fletcher met her at the door, and if he noticed her borrowed finery, he was kind enough not to mention it. "Thank you for coming. I know your family needs you at home. Papa is much better. The fever is almost gone and he is already trying to get out of bed." Theresa smiled. "Your help made all the difference. We cannot thank you enough. Seeing you smile is thanks enough." The words seemed to surprise him as much as they surprised her, and a faint color rose in his cheeks. "I mean, it is good to see your family doing better. Come on, I will show you around." The house was indeed in need of a woman's touch. Dishes were piled in the kitchen, dust coated the furniture, and the floors looked like they had not seen a good scrubbing in weeks. But it was a solid, well-built house, and Theresa could see the care that had gone into it. "My mother decorated most of this before she passed," Fletcher said, running a hand over a carved mantel. "That was 5 years ago. My father and I did our best to keep it up, but after he died, I let things slide. Too much work outside to worry much about inside. It is a beautiful home, it just needs some attention." Theresa rolled up her sleeves. "Where should I start?" "Wherever you think best. I will be outside working if you need anything." Theresa threw herself into the work, finding satisfaction in bringing order to the chaos. She washed dishes, swept and mopped floors, dusted every surface, and opened windows to let fresh air chase out the mustiness. By noon, the main rooms looked transformed. Fletcher came in for lunch, stopping short when he saw the changes. "You have been busy. I like to work. Makes me feel useful." Theresa had prepared a simple meal from the supplies in his pantry, nothing fancy but hearty and filling. They sat at the kitchen table, and she noticed he had washed up before coming in, his hair damp and his face clean. "This is the best meal I have had in this house since my housekeeper left," Fletcher said after the first bite. "You have a gift. It is just stew, maybe, but it tastes like home." He met her eyes across the table. "Thank you for doing this, Theresa. Not just the cleaning and cooking, but for letting me help your family. I know it was not easy to accept." "Pride makes poor company when you are hungry," Theresa said. "Though I admit, I still struggle with taking so much from you when we have nothing to give back. You are giving me your time and your skill. That is worth more than you think." Fletcher pushed back from the table. "I have to ride out to check on the cattle in the north pasture. I should be back before evening. Feel free to help yourself to anything you need, and do not work too hard." After he left, Theresa continued her work, moving upstairs to tackle the bedrooms. Fletcher's room was neat but impersonal, lacking the small touches that made a space feel lived in. She changed the linens, dusted, and was careful not to pry into anything private. The room next door had clearly belonged to his parents, and she left it mostly alone, sensing that some places were too full of memory to be disturbed. She was finishing up the last bedroom when she heard horses and voices from outside. Looking out the window, she saw Fletcher talking with three men she did not recognize. Their conversation looked tense, and even from a distance, she could see Fletcher's body language had shifted to something defensive. Theresa went downstairs and out onto the porch, some instinct telling her that Fletcher might need support, even if just a witness to whatever was happening. One of the men, tall and sharp-featured with a thin mustache, was speaking in a loud voice. "I am telling you, O'Brien, those cattle are mine. They must have wandered onto your property through a break in the fence. And I am telling you, Samuel, that I know my own cattle. These have my brand clear as day. If you have a claim, you will need to prove it." Samuel Miller. Theresa knew the name. He owned the spread to the north and had a reputation for being difficult. Her father had mentioned him before, usually not in flattering terms. "Your brand could have been applied over mine. Would not be the first time a rustler used that trick." Samuel's hand drifted toward the pistol at his hip. Fletcher's voice went cold. "Are you calling me a rustler? I am saying those cattle are mine and I want them back." Theresa stepped forward before she could think better of it. "Excuse me, gentlemen. I do not mean to interrupt, but Mr. O'Brien has been working his cattle all week. I have seen the books, and every head is accounted for with proper documentation." It was a lie, a complete fabrication, but she delivered it with such confidence that even Fletcher blinked in surprise. Samuel turned his sharp gaze on her. "And who might you be?" "Theresa Brennan. I work for Mr. O'Brien, managing his household accounts and records. If you would like to review the documentation, I would be happy to show it to you, though I should warn you that making false accusations about cattle theft is a serious matter in these parts." She kept her voice steady, channeling every bit of her mother's dignified bearing. Samuel's expression soured. He knew, as they all did, that cattle theft was indeed serious and that false accusations could bring as much trouble as actual rustling. "I do not need to see any records, but I will be watching, O'Brien. If any of my stock ends up in your herd, I will know about it." He and his men rode off, leaving dust and tension in their wake. Fletcher turned to Theresa with a mixture of amusement and admiration. "That was quick thinking, and a complete lie if I am not mistaken." "Sometimes a lie in service of the truth is acceptable," Theresa said primly. "He was looking for an excuse to cause trouble, and I simply removed his excuse." "Well, I appreciate it. Samuel Miller has been a thorn in my side since I inherited this place. He tried to buy it from my father for half what it was worth, and when father refused, Miller has been looking for ways to make life difficult ever since." Fletcher smiled. "Though I have to say, you were very convincing. If I did not know better, I would believe you actually had seen my books." "Perhaps you should show them to me then. That way, next time I will not be lying." "Next time? You planning on rescuing me again?" Theresa felt her cheeks warm. "I am planning on making sure you have documentation in order. That way, men like Samuel Miller cannot cause trouble based on nothing but bluster." Fletcher's expression softened. "You are something special, Theresa Brennan. You know that." The words hung in the air between them, charged with meaning that Theresa was not quite ready to examine. She cleared her throat and changed the subject. "I finished upstairs. Is there anything else you need done today? You have done more than enough. Let me pay you for today, and then I will ride you home before it gets dark." "I can ride myself home." "I am sure you can, but I would feel better escorting you. Samuel Miller is not the only one who might cause trouble on these roads, and I would not forgive myself if something happened to you." The concern in his voice was genuine, and Theresa found she could not argue with it. She accepted her wages, more than she had expected and more than the work warranted, but Fletcher waved off her protests. They rode side by side back to the Brennan place, their horses matching pace. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the New Mexico landscape in shades of gold and amber. It was beautiful in a harsh way, this land that demanded so much and gave back so little. But in this moment, with Fletcher beside her, Theresa felt a contentment she had not experienced in a long time. "Tell me about your family," Fletcher said. "I know your father is recovering and you have 2 brothers. What about you? What do you want from life?" It was such a direct question that Theresa had to think about her answer. "I want my family to be safe and happy. I want the ranch to prosper again, the way it did when I was a child. Beyond that, I suppose I want what most people want. A home, a family of my own someday, a life that means something. Those seem like good things to want. What about you? What does Fletcher O'Brien want from life?" He was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the horizon. "I want to honor my father's legacy, to prove I can manage this ranch as well as he did. I want to build something lasting, something I can pass on to my own children someday. And I want someone to share it with, someone who understands what this life requires and is willing to build it together." He glanced at her. "Though I have not had much luck in that department. Most women take one look at the work involved in ranching and decide they would rather be somewhere else." "Then they are not the right women," Theresa said firmly. "Ranch life is hard, but it is also good. There is satisfaction in working the land, in building something with your own hands. The right woman would see that." "Is that how you see it?" "Yes. I grew up on a ranch. I know what it requires. And I know that the work is easier when you have someone beside you who shares the load." They arrived at the Brennan place, and Fletcher helped her down from her horse with a hand that lingered just a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you again for today, for the work, and for standing up for me with Miller." "You are welcome. Thank you for everything you have done for my family." "I will see you in 3 days. Same time." "Yes, I will be there." Theresa watched him ride away, her hand still warm from where he had touched it. Inside, her mother was setting the table for supper, and her father was sitting in his chair by the fire, looking more like himself than he had in weeks. "How was your day, sweetheart?" Martha asked. "Good, productive." Theresa hung up her shawl. "Mama, what do you know about Samuel Miller?" Her mother's expression darkened. "That man is trouble. He has been trying to force small ranchers out of business for years, buying up their land for next to nothing. He wanted our place too, but your father refused to sell. Why do you ask?" Theresa told her about the confrontation, about Miller's accusations and her own intervention. William Brennan listened with a frown deepening on his weathered face. "Miller is dangerous, Theresa. You need to be careful around him, and Fletcher O'Brien needs to watch his back. Miller does not take kindly to people who stand up to him." "Fletcher can handle himself," Theresa said, though she felt a flutter of worry at her father's words. Over the following weeks, Theresa fell into a rhythm. 3 times a week, she rode to the O'Brien ranch where she cooked, cleaned, and gradually brought order to Fletcher's household. They fell into an easy companionship, working side by side when he was nearby, talking about everything and nothing. She learned that he loved reading but rarely had time for it, that he played the fiddle his father had taught him, and that he had a scar on his left shoulder from a horse that had thrown him when he was 16. He learned that she missed school, which she had left at 14 to help on the ranch, that she loved thunderstorms and hated snakes, and that she dreamed sometimes of traveling to places she had only read about in books. They never spoke directly about the feelings growing between them, but Theresa felt them like a current in the air, something electric and inevitable. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her heart race. She found herself taking extra care with her appearance on the days she would see him, braiding ribbons into her hair and wearing her best clothes. Her father continued to recover, growing stronger each day. The medicine Fletcher had paid for had worked miracles, and by the end of August, William Brennan was back on his feet, though Martha insisted he take things easy. The supplies Fletcher had provided had carried the family through the worst of their troubles, and with William able to work again, things were starting to look up. One afternoon in early September, Theresa was in Fletcher's kitchen preparing supper when he came in from outside, his face troubled. "There has been another confrontation with Miller. He is claiming that water from my creek is being diverted before it reaches his property." "Is it true?" "No. The creek flows naturally. I have not touched it. But Miller is stirring up trouble in town, telling anyone who will listen that I am stealing his water." Fletcher sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair. "I am worried he is going to force a showdown, and I do not want that. I just want to work my ranch in peace." Theresa sat down across from him, her mind racing. "What if we showed the town council the truth? If the creek is flowing naturally, there should be evidence of that. We could document it, show that you have made no alterations." "That is a good idea, but Miller has friends on the council. They might not believe me even with evidence. Then we need witnesses, impartial people who can verify what they see." Theresa leaned forward. "My father knows the land around here. He could examine the creek and testify that it has not been altered. And there must be others who would be willing to speak the truth." Fletcher looked at her with something that might have been awe. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "See solutions where I only see problems. You have a mind that works differently than mine, Theresa. You see angles I miss. My mother says I inherited my grandmother's practical nature. She could make $1 stretch to $2 and find a way through any difficulty." Theresa smiled. "Will you let me help? Will you let my father and me stand with you on this? I do not want to drag your family into my troubles." "You did not drag us anywhere. We are choosing to stand with you just as you stood with us when we needed help." She reached across the table and took his hand, a bold gesture that surprised them both. "Let us help Fletcher." His hand closed around hers, warm and strong. "All right. And thank you for everything." They sat there for a moment, hands joined, neither willing to break the contact. Finally, Fletcher spoke, his voice low. "Theresa, there is something I need to say." "What is it?" "These past weeks, having you here, getting to know you, it has been the best part of my days. You have brought life back into this house, but more than that, you have brought light into my life. I find myself thinking about you constantly, looking forward to the days when you come here, counting the hours until I see you again." He took a breath. "I am falling in love with you, Theresa Brennan. Actually, I think I have already fallen. I just needed to tell you." Theresa's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "I have been hoping you would say something like that, because I have been feeling the same way. Every time I ride here, every time I see you, it gets harder to leave. I lie awake at night thinking about you, wondering if you feel what I feel. And now I know." Fletcher stood, pulling her to her feet, and for a moment they just stood there, looking at each other. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and sweet, and Theresa felt like she was coming home. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly. I want to ask your father's permission and do this right." "You deserve that." "Yes," Theresa whispered. "Yes to all of it." Fletcher came to the Brennan ranch the next evening, dressed in his best clothes and looking nervous. William Brennan received him in the parlor, Martha hovering nearby with barely concealed delight. Theresa waited in the kitchen, her hands twisting in her apron. The conversation was short. Fletcher emerged 15 minutes later with a smile on his face. He said, "Yes, your father gave me permission to court you." From that moment, everything changed and yet stayed the same. Theresa continued working at the O'Brien ranch. But now, Fletcher took breaks to sit with her, stealing kisses in the kitchen and making plans for a future together. He came to Sunday supper at the Brennan place, charming her mother and winning over her brothers with his easy manner and willingness to help with whatever needed doing. The situation with Samuel Miller continued to simmer. With William Brennan's help, they documented the natural flow of the creek, taking measurements and making careful notes. They brought in 2 other ranchers who confirmed that Fletcher had made no alterations to the waterway. When Miller brought his complaint before the town council in Cimarron, Fletcher presented his evidence with Theresa and her father standing beside him. The council, faced with overwhelming proof of Miller's false claims, ruled in Fletcher's favor. Miller left the meeting in a rage, but he was smart enough to know when he was beaten, at least for the moment. Fletcher worried that it was not the end of the trouble, but for now, the immediate crisis was resolved. October brought cooler weather and relief from the brutal heat. The drought broke with a series of thunderstorms that soaked the parched ground. Standing on Fletcher's porch one evening, watching lightning dance across the sky, Theresa felt Fletcher's arms come around her from behind. "Marry me," he said into her ear. She turned in his arms, searching his face. "What? Marry me, Theresa? I know we have not been courting long, but I know my own heart. I want you as my wife. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old beside you. Say yes." "Yes," Theresa said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her there on the porch, the rain starting to fall around them, and Theresa had never been happier in her life. They were married in November, a simple ceremony in the small church in Cimarron with both families in attendance. Theresa wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and carried wildflowers that Fletcher had picked himself that morning. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Fletcher kissed her with a joy that brought tears to the eyes of everyone watching. The reception was held at the O'Brien Ranch, which was now Theresa's home. Friends and neighbors came to celebrate, bringing food and gifts and good wishes. Even the drought-stricken land seemed to celebrate, the sky clear and bright, the temperature perfect. That night, alone in the house that was now theirs together, Fletcher carried Theresa over the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. O'Brien." "It feels like home," Theresa said, looking around at the room she had cleaned and cared for, now truly hers. "It feels right." Their first months of marriage were an adjustment, learning to live together, to share space and decisions and dreams. But the foundation of friendship they had built made the adjustment easier. Fletcher was a considerate husband, patient and kind, and Theresa threw herself into making their house a real home. She planted a garden in the spring, despite the uncertain water supply, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil. She sewed curtains for the windows and hooked rugs for the floors. She cooked elaborate meals just for the pleasure of seeing Fletcher's face light up when he came in from working the ranch. Fletcher, for his part, worked harder than ever, driven by the desire to provide for his wife and the family they hoped to have. He expanded his herd, made improvements to the property, and began to earn a reputation as one of the most successful young ranchers in the territory. The Brennan Ranch also began to recover. With William healthy again and help from Fletcher during critical times, they made it through the winter and into a spring that brought better rains than anyone had seen in years. The land responded, grass growing thick and green, and the family's fortunes turned around. In May of 1885, Theresa realized she was pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Fletcher, wanting to be sure. When she finally shared the news over supper one evening, Fletcher's whoop of joy could probably be heard in town. "We are having a baby," he said, picking her up and spinning her around. "Theresa, we are having a baby. Be careful. You will drop me or knock something over or both." But she was laughing, caught up in his excitement. He set her down gently, his hands on her still flat belly. "A baby, our baby. I can hardly believe it. Believe it. And in about 7 months you are going to be a father." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Theresa felt well, aside from some morning sickness that passed after the first few months. Fletcher fussed over her constantly, worried that she was working too hard, but Theresa refused to be treated like an invalid. She continued managing the household, though Fletcher hired a girl from town to help with the heavier work. Samuel Miller remained quiet through the spring and summer, though Fletcher occasionally saw him at a distance, always watching. It made Fletcher uneasy, but without any overt threats or actions, there was nothing to be done about it. In December, on a cold night when snow was falling softly outside, Theresa went into labor. Her mother came to help, along with the midwife from Cimarron. Fletcher paced the floor downstairs, wearing a track in the wood, starting at every sound. The labor was long but uncomplicated. When the midwife finally called him upstairs just before dawn, Fletcher took the stairs 3 at a time. Theresa lay in their bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. "It is a boy," she said softly. "A son, Fletcher. We have a son." Fletcher approached the bed like a man in a dream. He looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled, eyes squeezed shut, and felt his heart crack open with a love so fierce it took his breath away. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Theresa, I love you so much. I love you too." She shifted the baby slightly. "Do you want to hold him?" Fletcher took his son in his arms, terrified of dropping him or holding him wrong, but the baby settled against his chest with a little sigh that melted every fear away. "What should we name him?" "I was thinking Matthew, after your father's middle name. Matthew O'Brien." Fletcher tested the name, found it good. "Yes, that is perfect." The winter passed in a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Fletcher had thought he understood love before, but fatherhood opened new depths. He would stand over Matthew's cradle for hours, watching him sleep, marveling at the tiny fingers and toes, the miniature perfection of this new person. Theresa bloomed in motherhood, patient and nurturing, though Fletcher made sure she had help so she was not overwhelmed. They moved through the days together, a team, partners in every sense of the word. Spring brought new challenges. A late freeze killed some of the early calves, and Fletcher worried about the financial impact. But the worry was nothing like it would have been before. He had Theresa beside him, and together they weathered the setback, finding ways to minimize the loss. In April, Samuel Miller made his move. Fletcher was in town picking up supplies when he overheard 2 men talking in the general store. They were discussing a meeting Miller had called, trying to convince other ranchers that Fletcher was using too much water from the shared creek, leaving less for everyone else downstream. It was the same accusation as before, just repackaged. But this time, Miller was being smarter about it, approaching other ranchers privately instead of going through official channels. He was trying to build a coalition against Fletcher, to isolate him and pressure him to sell his land. Fletcher came home and told Theresa what he had heard. She listened carefully, bouncing Matthew on her hip, her mind already working on solutions. "We need to get ahead of this. We need to talk to those ranchers ourselves, show them the truth before Miller poisons them against you. That will take time, visiting each ranch, making our case. Then we start tomorrow. Your reputation is at stake, Fletcher. We cannot let Miller's lies stand unchallenged." So began a series of visits to neighboring ranches. Fletcher and Theresa, with Matthew bundled against Theresa's chest, rode from property to property. They showed water measurements, explained the natural flow of the creek, and invited each rancher to come see for themselves that Fletcher had made no alterations to the waterway. Most were receptive, knowing Fletcher's reputation for honesty. A few were already convinced by Miller's smooth words, but even they had to acknowledge the evidence when presented with it. By the end of 2 weeks, Fletcher had secured the support of nearly every rancher in the area. When Miller called his meeting, hoping to rally opposition to Fletcher, only 3 ranchers showed up. His scheme collapsed before it could gain traction, and his influence in the area waned significantly. He sold his ranch 6 months later and left the territory, defeated not by force but by truth and patient persuasion. With that threat removed, Fletcher and Theresa settled into a peaceful routine. The ranch prospered. Their family grew. In 1887, Theresa gave birth to a daughter they named Lucy, who had her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes. Matthew, now a toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. The years passed in a blur of seasons. Another son, James, was born in 1889. The ranch continued to grow, becoming one of the most successful operations in New Mexico territory. Fletcher and Theresa worked side by side, partners in every sense, building a legacy for their children. The Brennan Ranch also thrived. William and Martha, growing older now, scaled back their operations with help from Thomas and Timothy, who had grown into capable young men. The two families remained close, celebrating holidays together, helping each other through hard times, rejoicing together in good times. In 1890, New Mexico saw increased settlement as more people moved west. Cimarron grew from a small town into a proper community with a real school, a second church, and several new businesses. Fletcher served on the town council for a time, helping to guide the community's growth. Through it all, the love between Fletcher and Theresa only deepened. They still stole moments alone when they could, sitting on the porch after the children were in bed, talking about their days and their dreams. Fletcher still looked at his wife with wonder, still marveled at his good fortune in finding her. One evening in the fall of 1891, they sat on that same porch where he had proposed during a thunderstorm years before. The children were asleep inside, the ranch was quiet, and the stars were brilliant overhead. "You remember the day we met?" Fletcher asked, his arm around Theresa's shoulders. "How could I forget? I was sneaking through your fence, stealing apples, and you caught me red-handed. Best day of my life, catching you like that. I took one look at you, all fierce and proud despite being caught, and I knew you were special. You hid it well. I thought you were just being kind. I was being kind, but I was also being selfish. I wanted an excuse to see you again, to get to know you. That is why I offered you work." Fletcher kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, Theresa. Thank you for building this life with me. I would choose you again in an instant. Through every difficulty, every challenge, I have never once regretted marrying you." Theresa turned to look up at him. "You opened your gate for me that day, but more than that, you opened your heart, and I fell into it and never wanted to leave. Good thing, because I am never letting you go." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, grateful for the journey that had brought them from that first meeting to this moment. The ranch spread out around them, their children slept safe inside, and the future stretched ahead full of promise. In 1893, Theresa gave birth to twin daughters, Rose and Ruth, completing their family. The house rang with laughter and noise, and Fletcher often joked that he was outnumbered by females and loving every minute of it. Matthew, now 7, took his role as big brother seriously, watching over his younger siblings with a protectiveness that reminded Theresa of Fletcher. Lucy, at 6, was already showing signs of being as smart and practical as her mother. She helped in the garden and with the younger children, and Fletcher predicted she would run her own ranch someday. The ranch continued to prosper through good years and bad. Fletcher's reputation for honesty and fair dealing meant he was often called on to mediate disputes between other ranchers. He and Theresa became pillars of their community, known for their generosity and willingness to help neighbors in need. William Brennan passed peacefully in his sleep in 1895, with Martha and all his children around him. It was the end of an era, but his legacy lived on in the ranch he had built and the values he had instilled in his children. Fletcher spoke at the funeral, talking about the man who had welcomed him into the family and taught him what it meant to be a good father. Martha lived on in the old ranch house with Thomas, who had married and taken over running the place. Timothy had gone east to Denver, where he worked for the railroad, but he came back often to visit. The turn of the century found Fletcher and Theresa in their late 30s, still as much in love as they had been as newlyweds. They stood on their porch on New Year's Eve 1899, watching fireworks over Cimarron that celebrated the new century. 20 years, Fletcher marveled. 20 years since I caught you sneaking through my fence. 16 years since we married. Feels like yesterday and like forever at the same time. Do you ever think about that girl you were, desperate enough to steal apples? Sometimes. She seems like a different person now. So much has changed. Theresa leaned against her husband. But I remember how scared I was, how hopeless everything seemed. And I remember you choosing kindness when you could have chosen harshness. That choice changed everything. I just did what any decent person would do. No. Many people would have had me arrested or at least run me off. You saw past the surface to the person underneath. You gave me dignity when I had none, and you gave my family hope when we had lost it. Theresa turned to face him. That is who you are, Fletcher O'Brien. A man who opens gates instead of building walls. A man who sees the best in people. I fell in love with that as much as I fell in love with your blue eyes and charming smile. Fletcher laughed and pulled her close. Well, I am glad my eyes and smile did not hurt my chances. The years continued to roll by, each bringing its own joys and challenges. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and dreams. Matthew became a rancher like his father, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day operations. Lucy did indeed run her own spread after marrying a young rancher from over near Santa Fe, proving Fletcher's prediction correct. James became a teacher, opening a school in Cimarron and educating a generation of children. Rose and Ruth, the twins, stayed close to home, Rose marrying a local shopkeeper and Ruth working alongside Matthew on the family ranch. Fletcher and Theresa became grandparents, then great-grandparents, their family tree spreading wide and deep. The O'Brien ranch remained in the family, passed from generation to generation, along with the stories of how it all began. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1925, the family gathered for a celebration. Fletcher and Theresa, now in their early 60s, sat in places of honor while children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren swirled around them. Someone asked Fletcher to tell the story of how he and Theresa met, as they always did at family gatherings. Fletcher looked at his wife, at the silver in her hair and the lines on her face, and saw the same beautiful girl who had been brave enough to climb through a fence for her family. I caught her stealing apples, he began, and the room grew quiet as everyone listened to the familiar tale. When he finished, their oldest grandson asked, "What made you help her, Grandpa? Why did you give her the apples instead of chasing her off?" Fletcher considered the question seriously. Because everyone deserves kindness, especially when they are struggling. Because one person helping another can change everything. And because when you have the power to make someone's burden lighter, you should do it without expecting anything in return. I gave your grandmother some apples, and she gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams. The best gate I ever walked through, Theresa added, squeezing his hand. Martha Brennan had passed several years earlier, joining William in the cemetery overlooking Cimarron. Thomas and Timothy, now old men themselves, sat at the celebration sharing memories of their sister as a young woman. As the party wound down and people began heading home, Fletcher and Theresa found themselves alone on the porch, the same place where so many important moments of their life together had unfolded. "Tired?" Fletcher asked. "A little. Happy, though. Very happy." Theresa rested her head on his shoulder. "Did you ever imagine, that day you caught me in your apple orchard, that it would lead to all this? I hoped. From the moment I saw you, something in my heart recognized something in yours. I knew you were going to be important to me. I just did not know how important." Fletcher kissed her forehead. "You are my greatest blessing, Theresa. Everything good in my life flows from you. And you saved us. You saved my whole family with your kindness, and then you gave me a love I did not know existed outside of story books." Theresa sighed contentedly. "When I crawled through that fence, I was looking for apples. I found a whole orchard of blessings instead." They sat together as the stars came out. Two people whose lives had intertwined by chance and choice, whose love had built a legacy that would endure for generations. The fence that had once separated their properties was long gone, torn down years ago to join the two ranches into one larger spread. But the gate Fletcher had opened remained, kept as a symbol and a reminder. Over that gate, Matthew had hung a sign years ago, "The Gate of Kindness." It served as an entrance to the main yard, and everyone who passed through it knew the story of how Fletcher O'Brien had opened his gate and his heart to a desperate girl, and how that simple act of compassion had created a love story for the ages. Fletcher passed away peacefully in 1932 at the age of 73, surrounded by his family. He lived long enough to see his great-great-grandchildren, to know that his legacy was secure. His last words were to Theresa, holding her hand as he had held it for nearly 50 years. "I love you. Thank you for the apples." Theresa knew he meant more than the fruit. He meant thank you for everything, for the life they had built, for the love they had shared. She kissed him and told him she loved him, and he slipped away with a smile on his face. Theresa lived on for another 8 years, presiding over the family with grace and wisdom. She told the story of how she met Fletcher to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive not just in the family but in the community. The O'Brien Ranch remained successful under Matthew's management, and the values Fletcher and Theresa had instilled continued to guide the family. When Theresa passed in 1940, at the age of 76, the whole town of Cimarron turned out for her funeral. She was laid to rest beside Fletcher in the cemetery on the hill, under a stone that read, "She crawled through a fence and found forever." The ranch continued in the family, generation after generation. The Gate of Kindness still stood at the entrance, weathered by time but solid. A reminder that sometimes the best things in life begin with a simple choice to be kind, to open a gate instead of reinforcing a wall, to see a person instead of just a trespasser. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, that choice leads to a love that echoes through the generations, a love that builds legacies and inspires stories, a love that begins with a desperate girl stealing apples and a kind-hearted cowboy who decided to help instead of judge. Their story became legend in that part of New Mexico, told and retold as an example of how love can grow from the smallest seeds of kindness, watered by compassion and tended by two hearts brave enough to trust in each other. The land Fletcher and Theresa had worked so hard to build up continued to thrive. Their descendants kept the ranch going through the Great Depression, through droughts and economic hardships, always remembering the lessons their ancestors had taught about perseverance, kindness, and the strength that comes from standing together. The small apple tree where Theresa had been caught became a landmark on the property. It lived for nearly 80 years, producing fruit long after both Fletcher and Theresa were gone. When it finally died in the 1960s, Matthew's son carefully preserved wood from its trunk, crafting it into a rocking chair that sat in the main house, another tangible link to the past. Family reunions continued to be held on the anniversary of Fletcher and Theresa's wedding each November. The tradition held strong into the 21st century, with O'Briens coming from all over the country to gather on the land where their ancestors had built their life together. The Gate of Kindness was refurbished and maintained as carefully as any precious heirloom, because it represented not just history but values. The value of compassion, of seeing others as fellow humans deserving of help, of opening yourself to love even when it comes in unexpected ways. Documents from the period, carefully preserved by generations of the family, told the full story. Theresa's diary, discovered after her death, contained detailed accounts of those early days. Her fear when Fletcher caught her, her wonder at his kindness, her growing love for the man who had saved her family. Fletcher's careful record books showed not just the financial transactions of the ranch, but also personal notes. Theresa came today, house feels like home, and married the most wonderful woman in the world, and son born, life complete. Letters between them during the brief times they were separated, when Fletcher had to travel for cattle sales or Theresa visited her family, revealed a deep, emotional intimacy. They wrote to each other as best friends as well as lovers, sharing thoughts and dreams and daily details. These letters were compiled into a book by a descendant in the 1980s, preserving the love story for future generations. The impact of Fletcher and Theresa's choice to help each other rippled outward in ways they could never have imagined. The culture of community support they helped foster in Cimarron became part of the town's identity. The tradition of neighbors helping neighbors, of looking out for those who were struggling, could be traced back in part to the example they set. Schools in the area taught local history that included the story of the O'Briens, using it as an example of how individual actions can shape a community. Children learned that one act of kindness, one choice to help instead of harm, could change lives and create legacies. The fence line where Theresa had first trespassed, where Fletcher had caught her with her dress torn and her pride in tatters, became a historical site. A marker was placed there in the 1970s by the New Mexico Historical Society, commemorating the spot where one of the region's great love stories began. Through wars and peace, through technological changes that transformed ranching from what Fletcher had known to something he would hardly recognize, through all the shifts and changes of more than a century, the core of what Fletcher and Theresa built remained. Not just the physical ranch, though that endured, but the values they lived by, the love they shared, and the example they set. Their story proved that love does not require grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It requires only two people willing to see each other clearly, to stand beside each other through difficulties, to build something together day by day. It requires the courage to trust, to be vulnerable, to open not just a gate but a heart. Fletcher had seen a desperate girl stealing apples and chosen compassion. Theresa had seen a kind man offering help and chosen trust. Together, they had built a life that honored both choices, that proved kindness was never wasted and trust never misplaced when given to the right person. The New Mexico sunset painted the same land in the same colors it had painted in 1884, when two lives first intersected at a fence line. The cattle that grazed those acres now were descendants of the herds Fletcher had raised. The house where his great-great-great-grandchildren now lived had been expanded and modernized, but at its core was the structure he had built with his own hands, the home he had shared with Theresa. And through it all, the gate of kindness stood as a testament to a simple truth. Sometimes the best things in life begin with an open gate and an open heart, with a cowboy who chose mercy over judgment, and a woman brave enough to accept help and return it with love. Their love story had long since passed into legend, but the lessons it taught remained as relevant as ever, proving that some truths transcend time, some loves echo through generations, and some choices change not just individual lives but the character of entire communities. The story of Fletcher and Theresa O'Brien, which began with stolen apples and an open gate, had become part of the fabric of New Mexico history. A reminder that the greatest legacies are built not on wealth or power but on love, kindness, and the courage to help a stranger in need. And in the end, is that not what all the best love stories teach us? That love transforms us, that kindness matters, and that sometimes the person we are meant to spend our life with appears when we least expect it, in circumstances that seem impossible, teaching us that life's greatest gifts often come disguised as ordinary moments, if only we have the wisdom to recognize them and the courage to embrace them.